Welcome back to Generals and Napoleon, episode 47, General Foy, one of Napoleon's best and brightest. This episode is sponsored by NapoleonicImpressions.com, a site for unique gifts and souvenirs inspired by the Napoleonic Wars. One other reminder, please follow us on Spotify and YouTube at the Generals and Napoleon podcast. Now, on with the show. Why would 100,000 people attend the funeral of a general who fought his last battle for France 10 years earlier? He was a bright man and a courageous one, receiving 15 wounds over his storied career in the army. In fact, so many French citizens attended the funeral that it worried the ruling Bourbon royals, who were always on the lookout for rebellions. Maximilien Sébastien Foy was born in February 1775 in the Somme region of France. His father was a former French soldier who passed away when Foy was just 4 years old. He was raised by his mother, who was originally from England. He began his military career at the age of 15 when he enrolled in the French artillery school in 1790. 2 years later, he received his officer's commission as lieutenant in the 3rd Foot Artillery of the French Army. He saw his first action at the Battle of Jemappes and was promoted to captain a year later, but was thrown in prison for making unpatriotic remarks. Throughout his career, Foy maintained strong Republican beliefs, and it wouldn't be the last time these beliefs would land him in hot water. Again, this was a dangerous time to be an officer in the French army. One wrong move could send a man to the guillotine. But he was later released as the Reign of Terror finally came to an end with the downfall of Robespierre. Foy was reinstated as a captain and saw action in the Army of the Rhine and Moselle. In 1797, he was wounded in a skirmish during the crossing of the Rhine. He was a natural leader of men and always commanded in the front lines, which resulted in many wounds. He was promoted again, this time to major. In 1798 and 99, Foy served in Switzerland under future Marshal Oudinot. At the exceptional victory in the Battle of Zurich over the Russians, he commanded the artillery for a division under future Marshal Massena. Foy fought again at Enghien, Meerscherch, and Biberach. During this time, Napoleon had made himself First Consul of France in a coup d'etat. In 1802, Foy voted against Napoleon making himself First Consul for life, and this action was noted by the future emperor. However, Napoleon continued to employ Foy because of his immense talent and skill. In 1803, he was in the camps of Boulogne, maintaining the mobile batteries that defended the coastline of France. The British Navy would occasionally launch raids against the dense masses of Napoleon's troops, and these raids had to be repelled by the French coastal batteries. The following year, Foy voted against the establishment of Napoleon's empire, but yet again, the emperor continued to place him in important positions. First, he was made Chief of Artillery under Second Corps with future Marshal Marmont. Then, in 1807, Foy was dispatched to Turkey to serve there under French Ambassador General Sebastiani. While in Turkey, Foy organized the defense of the Dardanelles Strait to repel the British and Russians. During the brief 2-year Anglo-Turkish War, the Ottomans, with French assistance, erected powerful batteries and strengthened their fortifications. British warships were pounded by cannon fire, suffering the loss of 2 ships. In 1808, Foy was reassigned to serve in Portugal under General Junot. He was present during the Battle of Vimeiro in August 1808 against the British army under the future Duke of Wellington. The battle was a loss for the French, and Foy was wounded again. The French army of Portugal surrendered to the British in the infamous Convention of Sintra, where the British Navy returned the French troops and all of their equipment and loot to France. A few months later, Foy was promoted to brigadier general. In January 1809, he joined Marshal Soult's corps and served in the Battle of Corunna. Although the British repelled the French attack at the battle, they were forced to evacuate back to England. It must have been a good feeling of accomplishment for Foy, who was part of the surrender to the British 5 months earlier. He continued to serve under Soult during the reconquest of Portugal. As the French army approached the city of Oporto, General Foy wished to take the city without a fight. He petitioned the Archbishop of Oporto to open the city gates to the French, but instead he was captured by the Portuguese militia. The Portuguese troops almost immediately killed him, thinking he was the dreaded, one-armed General Loison. For the most part, French commanders were not overly cruel people. However, General Loison was one of the worst in the Peninsula War, leaving trails of burned towns and countryside destruction wherever his division went. Loison's hand had to be amputated after a hunting accident in 1806, and the Portuguese called him maneta, or one hand. Getting back to our story, while being held as a captive by the Portuguese, Foy astutely held up both his hands to show that he was not Loison. The Portuguese still stripped him of his clothes and threw him in a dungeon, but he was freed by French troops when they took the city. A few months later, during the British surprise attack on Oporto, Foy spotted the river crossing of enemy troops under the future Duke of Wellington. He alerted Marshal Soult, but it was too late, and the French were routed, with Foy being wounded yet again. In 1810, Napoleon had grown weary of the setbacks in Portugal and dispatched arguably his best general to settle the business in Marshal Massena. Massena pleaded with the emperor to avoid this deployment, citing age and exhaustion, but Napoleon insisted. When Massena arrived to take command of the army of Portugal, his best years were clearly behind him. Foy remarked, quote, "This is not the old Massena. The man with the flashing eyes, the expressive face, the alert figure. He is only 52, but he looks as if he were 60, end quote." Indeed, when Massena first met with his corps commanders, he delivered one of the least inspirational speeches in history, saying, quote, "Gentlemen, I am here contrary to my own wish. I begin to feel myself too old and too weary to go on with active service. The emperor says that I must, and replied to the reasons for declining the post which I gave him by saying my reputation would suffice to end the war," end quote. That being said, when the Duke of Wellington was asked which marshal was the best soldier he faced, he replied Massena without hesitation. That's high praise considering Wellington faced off against Marshal Soult, Victor, Ney, Marmont, Jourdan, and many other French generals. Wellington also mentioned that he never allowed himself to take risks when facing Massena. When facing the other marshals, he was more willing to roll the dice. Getting back to our story, Foy led his brigade in the Battle of Busaco under Massena, but this resulted in another loss for the French, and Foy was wounded once again. However, Foy did receive some good news that year as he was made Baron of the Empire by Napoleon. As the French army pursued the British into Portugal, their advance was blunted by the impregnable lines of Torres Vedras. Massena dispatched General Foy to Paris to give Napoleon an update on the situation. The impatient emperor was only getting updates by gleaning information from British newspapers. The lines of communication from Portugal to France were constantly being harassed by Spanish guerrilla forces, and very little information was getting through. Napoleon was so impressed by Foy and his appraisal of the situation that he promoted him to General of Division on the spot. Foy returned to Spain to serve under Marshal Marmont, who had replaced Massena as commander-in-chief. Marmont was soon routed by the Duke of Wellington at the Battle of Salamanca. Foy and his troops covered the retreat of Marmont's army. During the retreat, Foy suffered a terrible defeat at the Battle of Garcia Hernandez. The pursuing allies broke 3 French infantry squares, an incredibly rare feat. Out of 4,000 troops, Foy suffered 1,600 killed, wounded, or captured. Later, during the 1813 Battle of Vittoria, in which Wellington defeated Napoleon's brother, King Joseph, Foy was not present. However, he performed well during the invasion of the Pyrenees on the Spanish-French border. He and General D'Erlon beat the British at the Battle of Maille in July 1813, but fell back into France with Marshal Soult. Foy distinguished himself in the bloody Battle of Orthez, which was another loss for the French army. During the battle, Foy walked behind his frontline units, and a shrapnel shell exploded over his head, driving a metal shard into his shoulder. His wounding disheartened his soldiers, who began falling back. He was apparently left for dead on the battlefield and was captured by the British. As he was recovering from his wounds, he was deeply touched by the Duke of Wellington, who stopped by to shake his hand and discuss the war. Foy remarked on the Duke in his memoirs, quote, "He is slim, of medium build, and has an aquiline nose. His countenance is full of distinction, simplicity, and kindness." End quote. Regarding the British soldiers, Foy stated, quote, "The glory of the British Army is based principally upon its excellent discipline and upon the cool and sturdy courage of the people. Indeed, we know of no other troops as well disciplined." End quote. Napoleon abdicated his throne 2 months later, and Foy served the returning Bourbon King Louis XVIII. But he flocked to Napoleon's banner when the emperor escaped from Elba in 1815. General Foy commanded an infantry division under Marshal Ney at the stalemate Battle of Quatre Bras against the Allies. At the Battle of Waterloo, he supported Prince Jerome's assault on the Hougoumont farmhouse. This was a large and well-built country house hidden in a grove of trees. The house was along the front lines of the British Army and faced north along a sunken covered lane along which it could be resupplied by the Allies. Despite Foy's best efforts, the farmhouse was never taken, and the general was wounded for the 15th time. After Napoleon's second and final exile to St. Helena, Foy was put on the inactive list by the Bourbon royals. In 1818, he reconciled with King Louis and his court and became a politician. He was distinguished for his honesty and eloquence within the Chamber of Deputies. He earned the displeasure of the Bourbons in 1819 for his liberal views. He later wrote a memoir on the Peninsular War and died somewhat prematurely of a heart aneurysm in 1825 at age 50. Foy was survived by his wife, Elizabeth Augustine Daniels, who lived till 1868, and his 5 children. Looking back at his career, he didn't win many battles, but his men and his opponents respected him greatly, and despite many grievous injuries, Foy always returned to the front to fight another day. Napoleon always appreciated fighting generals like Foy. His integrity, powerful oratories, and military reputation gained him a popular following amongst the French populace and amongst his troops. This is probably why tens of thousands of citizens showed their respect by attending his funeral procession. I'd like to wrap it up at this point. One quick reminder that if you'd like bonus content, please check out patreon.com/generals and Napoleon. I'd also recommend you follow our Spotify page and YouTube page for the Generals and Napoleon podcast. You can also check us out on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks again.